Welcome back, everybody. Today we will begin looking at what are known as market failures, when the market equilibrium is less than optimal. And so we'll begin by discussing what are known as externalities. And so our goal is to be able to explain what an externality is and how it affects the market. We'll want to be able to distinguish between positive and negative externalities and be able to graph them. We'll discuss the solutions that can help bring the market into a more socially optimal equilibrium by using what are known as Pigouvian subsidies and taxes, as well as discussing Coase theorem and how it can explain the ability of markets to address externalities on their own without government intervention. So when it comes to externalities, what they are is a recognition that individuals only care about themselves. We are individual profit maximizers. We make decisions based on the marginal benefit and marginal cost of our behavior to ourselves. External impacts on other people do not come into play when it comes to determining what's best for you, at least in our model. And so as a result, because we're assuming that people are individual profit maximizers and they don't see the impacts of their behavior, it means then that they will often produce too little of good items, things that add benefit to other people. And at the same time, we generally will overproduce too many bad behaviors or bad items that harm people. This is not to say that we shouldn't produce negative things. It's just a question of how much. So something like pollution is a negative externality. It has an impact not only on myself, but on other people. But it's not to say that we should eliminate all pollution. There is some benefit to a certain amount of pollution. The ability to generate electricity with natural gas, for example, will produce a certain degree of pollution. But while that's negative, the benefits to society of energy, including things like increased sanitation, lighting inside, refrigeration for food and other things, means that that pollution does have some positive benefits. So we're not saying stamp out all negative things, but what we are saying is we need to modify or limit the amount of negative that we accept. So what we're seeing here is then that when there are externalities, there is a difference between my private benefits and costs and the benefits and costs to the society, to anyone beyond myself. So, for example, home improvement has both private and external benefits. Privately, it makes my house nicer for me. It makes it more comfortable for my family. It makes it so that when I look at my house, I'm happier about where I live. It turns out that when I do something nice to the external side of my house, it not only makes me happy, but it makes my neighbor across the street happy, because when they look out their window, they see a nicer building. So if I fix my shutters or put new siding on the house, it not only makes my house nicer, but because my house is nicer, it makes it so that the people across the street are happier, and it increases their property value. So what are externalities? Externalities occur whenever there are external impacts of our behavior. They either occur when we are producing goods or when we are consuming goods. And those externalities can be either positive or negative. Keeping in mind that when externalities are negative, it means that we're generally overproducing something that is negative. And when they're positive, we tend to underproduce them. When it comes to benefits, the marginal social benefit is the sum of my marginal personal benefit and my marginal external benefit. So the benefit I receive plus any benefit that other people receive equals our marginal social benefit. When there are no externalities, these two are the same. Personal social benefit will be the same, and they are the demand curve. When there are externalities, there will be two different curves, as you'll see in just a minute. When it comes to social costs, the same thing applies. Marginal social cost is the sum of my personal cost and my external costs. When there are no externalities, they're the same, and they serve as the supply curve. When there are externalities, then we will see a difference between the two. We'll have two different curves, one that points to the market outcome and one that points to the more efficient social outcome. The way to bridge the gap between personal costs and benefits and social costs and benefits is to charge either a Pigouvian tax or pay out what's known as a Pigouvian subsidy. The purpose of it is to help actors internalize the impact of their behavior. If you're subsidizing me, it helps me see the benefits that you're receiving. And if you're taxing me, it helps me to see in a tangible way the negative impacts of my behavior on you. And it also then changes my decision making, because it either raises the benefits of my behavior, causing me to do more of the good thing, or it will increase the costs of my negative behavior and cause me to do less of the negative thing. Being able to charge these subsidies or taxes, depending on the situation, will enable the market to go from an inefficient market outcome to the more efficient, socially optimal outcome, in which marginal social benefits and costs are balanced. So when it comes to positive externalities, we have both positive externalities in consumption as well as in production. Consumption is when I use a product. So me attending university has benefits for me in my own personal professional career, but it also has benefits to the society at large. The more educated a population, generally the wealthier it is, and the more benefits that society has for its members. Or planting flowers in front of my house makes me happy, makes my neighbor across the street happy because they like looking at all these beautiful flowers. Or getting a flu shot or other vaccine can have a positive externality because it not only helps me stay healthy, but protects other people from getting sick as well. When it comes to positive externalities in production, it'd be something like a bakery, where there's this lovely aroma that comes from the bakery. The baker doesn't care that I enjoy the aroma. He wants me to buy his bread, but the fact that the surrounding neighborhood smells much better is not really part of his calculus when he's deciding whether to bake bread or not. And yet, it makes other people happy. Or beekeepers. They have bees so that they can make honey, and that's great for them. But there is this external benefit to society because while my neighbor has a beekeeping business and he's making honey, he's also raising bees that are busy pollinating all of the plants in my yard and making my yard more beautiful at the same time. When it comes to graphing positive externalities, we have to distinguish between consumption and production. In the case of a positive externality in consumption, we find where the personal benefit and personal cost curves intersect. That's the market outcome. But as we said, it's less than the optimal amount, because it turns out that if I find the intersection for the market, that because it's a positive externality, there are more benefits than I realize, which means that I should be doing more of the behavior. So you find the market equilibrium, and then to graph this out, sort of more up for more benefit, and then to the right because we should be producing more of the good. That point then indicates the socially optimal price and quantity. We should be producing more than we are. So the way then to solve this problem is to subsidize people. That is, pay them to do something positive. You could pay somebody to get a vaccine shot, for example, and that would raise the benefit to them beyond just their initial personal benefit. And because there's added benefit in the form of financial payment, they'll want to do more of the behavior. There is also deadweight loss as a result of this market failure. When we're at our market equilibrium, we are producing less than we should. So again, with deadweight loss, it's an arrow pointing from our current quantity to the optimal quantity, which is where we have marginal social cost and marginal social benefit intersecting. And so that's where that red triangle marks out deadweight loss. When it comes to production, we realize here that there are fewer costs than we realized to society, that people really want more of our behavior, not less. And so there are fewer costs than we realize, which means we should be producing more of the good. And so our market equilibrium is producing too few goods than the socially optimal. So the solution would be to subsidize businesses, pay them to reduce their costs. So their personal costs were at P1. As a result of the subsidy, it lowers their cost of production, which will incentivize them to produce more of the good. And how much subsidy? Well, It's the vertical distance between the personal cost curve and the social cost curve. Negative externalities are sort of the opposite when it comes to consumption. There's things that we do that make ourselves happy but have a negative consequence for people around us. Texting while driving, smoking cigarettes, listening to loud music in your dorm room when people are trying to study. These are all things that have negative consequences for people outside of yourself. And when it comes to production, emissions from a factory or choosing to mow your lawn at 6 in the morning might make you happy, but it certainly doesn't make your neighbor happy, or leaks from oil drills or something like that. To graph the negative externality in consumption, again, we would do the marginal personal benefit, marginal personal cost curves. That would be where our market would be. We are overproducing, as it turns out that the social benefit is less than our personal benefit. So a solution here would be to tax people, make them have to pay for their behavior, because if I have to pay, then there's less benefit to my behavior than I realized. So I will do less of it. As a result, we'll end up at the socially optimal output, which is less than what the market would generally have on its own. The amount of tax is the vertical distance between the social benefit and personal benefit curve. And again, you'll see that there is deadweight loss. It is the quantity we are producing at. It's an arrow pointing from where we are to where we would like to be. So this red triangle is our deadweight loss. Negative externalities in production. Similar story. Again, we would find where personal and social benefits intersect. We realize that there are more costs to our behavior than we realized, so we should be doing less of that behavior. So we go from our initial market equilibrium and then to our optimal equilibrium. We're producing too much. Again, a tax would help solve that problem. It would raise the costs in the minds of the producers, leading them to producing fewer of those items. Not necessarily all of them, but certainly less than before. And again, that tax would be the vertical distance between the marginal social cost curve and the marginal personal cost curve. And our deadweight loss is that arrow pointing from the quantity we are producing at and pointing to the optimal output. Now, the Coase theorem is one approach to creating this socially optimal output. It argues that private markets can arrive at efficient outcomes and overcome market failure without government intervention as long as there are clearly defined property rights and that the transaction costs are low. That is, that it doesn't cost us much to come to or reach an agreement or enforce the agreement. The key is that we get parties to internalize the externality. That is, help them to see the effect that they're having on other people. So, for example, if I'm in my college dorm room and I want to listen to super loud music late into the night, I can do that. It causes a problem for other people. So the Coase theorem says that we can negotiate a solution. And it really doesn't matter who has the property right. If I have the right to listen to loud music, then if it bothers you, you should come over, knock on my door, and ask me to turn it down. When I say no, because I have a right to listen to my music, you might look at me and say, but it's hurting me. So the way to get you to understand how much it hurts me is to pay you to turn down your music, to turn it off. And so I have the right to listen to my music, but I'm willing to turn it down because any sort of lost benefit I receive is being made up for in terms of the financial incentive you're giving me. You're paying me to listen to it at a quieter volume or to turn it off. And while it annoys me that I have to turn it off, you've made up for it by paying me. So I'll turn it down and it'll be less loud music. If you have the right to silence and I want to listen to my loud music, then maybe what I'll do is come to you and say, I understand that it's hurting your ears and you want to go to sleep. I would like to listen to it for a little bit longer. How about if I pay you, compensate you for the damage you're receiving so I can listen to it a little bit longer for tonight? And so, yes, you're not thrilled that the music's being played loud, but you're willing to allow that music to be played longer because I am compensating you for your damages. Either way, we'll end up at the efficient outcome. This sort of private negotiation works in our model as long as it's relatively inexpensive for us to negotiate. It doesn't work if communication costs are very high or if legally binding agreements are difficult or costly to enforce, or if it just takes a long time for us to negotiate and implement any sort of bargain. So Coase theorem is not perfect, but it does present an ability for markets to solve the problem on their own. Next time, we'll talk a little bit more about market failures, and I will talk to you then.